it's 48 hours is nothing to come here. It's a big honor to be here, and I'm very, very happy. And I also feel a bit humble to tell things about change in a country and in a city like Hong Kong. But that's what I'll do. I'll try and tell you a little bit of a story about how we in the Netherlands, as an independent think tank, try to change and make society smarter, as Ada said. So it's a Dutch story about creating societal change, and we can see together if there's any lessons for you to think, okay, it might be a very small country without high buildings and various mills, but it might be some lessons that also apply here. And actually, if I have only one lesson, I've been here already for 2 days and talked to you and heard about your inspiring ideas. I really think that if you have ideas and actually also are prepared to get your feet dirty and try things out and to become a community together like you are, the MaDs, a lot is possible. So let me bring you to the Netherlands. And I think also one thing that we all have is that we have quite big ambitions all here, but it all starts with taking small steps. And these steps can be as small as you want them to be. But all these steps together can actually, I believe, create quite a big change. So Kennisland, it's a think or a do tank based in Amsterdam. That's actually our building right there. And we are already, for about 15 years, we have a team of 20 people, also mostly young people. And we do all sorts of projects. So although we call ourselves a think tank, it's not that we smoke cigars in big fat chairs. We actually do a lot because we actually think that it is by doing that you make a change. And making society smarter, and then of course every time the question is, what is smarter? And I must be honest to you that in the 15 years, the definition of what is smarter has changed. So I think it's, in a way, every time, every year, but also almost every day with the team at Kennisland, we have discussions about what is a good society? What is getting smarter? What are the things that we need to do? And it's been changing. I think one thing that is also clear in the Netherlands, and although Ada said it's a very mature country, there's also definitely some things happening in Europe, but also in the Netherlands, in that a lot of the solutions that used to be in place are not working anymore. In the Netherlands, there's a very strong government, and the idea was actually always that every problem there would be, the government could solve it for a lot of sectors. And what you see at the moment is that it's not really working anymore. So there are a lot of challenges in society where the government doesn't really know what to do anymore. And also it's having a lack of money in order to really implement. And a lot of the implementation that has been happening for the last 40 years, a lot of the implementations didn't work. So there are a lot of services that no one uses, there are a lot of negative side effects. So more and more people are starting to think that we need to reconsider how we innovate, that we need to reconsider what innovation actually is. And that innovation is not only something that is about products or technology, and it's something that comes out of universities or the multinationals, but that innovation is something which we can all do and we're all part in, and that we all actually need to be part of. And that it's not only about products, but also, for example, our processes, about how we work together. So, at the moment, our definition of a smart society is a society where the talents and the expertise and the knowledge of all people in all sectors of society are used. Young people, old people, poor people, rich people. But how can you use that to its fullest potential? So my definition of a knowledge society or Kennisland would be a country where you really make use of all this talent and knowledge and potential in a society. Well, this of course then perhaps sounds easy and you might agree with me, but the question of course is also, how do you do that? And one of the things that we've been doing, I was saying to you projects, and it's I think in a way similar to what you're doing here, is there are a lot of people out there with a lot of good ideas and very radical even projects or innovations, but a lot of times we don't really see them. A lot of times when we look at innovation, we only look at the government or the big companies or the universities. So one of the things that we did in the Netherlands, we actually copied it from the UK, so we also talked about how you can copy innovations, is what we call the Radical Innovators Program. So we set up a program throughout the whole of Netherlands, and we invited people to come up with their good ideas. Where are the radical innovators in the country? And we did a big competition, and here you see the final event, where we have 30 people on the stage who were chosen actually to be the radical innovators of 2013. And what is interesting, and it might be similar to what you're doing, is that a lot of these people, although they were having different projects, a lot of them have a lot of things that are in common. The way that they look at the future, the problems that they encounter, that they're often not being mainstream, but they dare to go against the stream. And one thing that I saw with you is that you really like to talk to each other, and that you find inspiration not only from speakers like I'm standing on the stage right now, but that you're actually finding a lot of inspiration from each other. And that is, being a community can really help you further. And these radical innovators have that too. But it does help if an intermediate organization like Kennisland gives them a platform or gives them some support and helps them to meet. And I think often that's the role that we have. We're actually not alone in this, so this is quite, I don't know if you recognize the bit bigger man, I will say polite. This is the former commissioner of the European Commission, Mr. Barroso, and this is the social innovation competition. And although this was not so big, this was quite special, I thought, that the European Commission actually set out the social innovation competition, because they also are interested in where are these unusual suspects, where are these innovators that we really don't know. So here you see him, Kennisland was also part of the social innovation competition. You see him on the stage with the 3 finalists and people really from different sectors. And if you just look a little bit at all of these projects and initiatives, you could see perhaps some things that I heard in your projects as well. That the thing that is important for society is not only wealth, but that it's also really a focus into well-being. And this sounds logical, but for years, especially also in Europe, the leading thought has been, as long as we have enough wealth, the well-being will come by itself. This like trickle-down effect from wealth. And it actually turns out this is not true. You're not only going to create more well-being through wealth. So you see a lot of these projects, for example, where well-being is really the focus, and not only the focus on making money. But also that people are not only consumers anymore, but that they want to be co-producers. That people, also through the internet, want to be empowered and not only be treated as a client, buy something good, not good, but actually want to help reshape and make and create their society. That we don't only think about innovation in the form of a new product or a gadget, something else that we can have in our pocket, but that it can be about processes, like you've been doing here for 3 days. And another important thing I think a lot of these projects had is that they try to connect different silos. That it's not only about housing, but that it's about housing and elderly care and well-being and being young. So how do you get in a more kind of horizontal way of working instead of within the different disciplines or silos that we often organize our country in? And that the lab is not something anymore that is kind of closed off in a university and you're wearing white suits and you're doing difficult things, but that the lab can be on the street. And that actually our whole society is a lab where we can experiment and play, as a lot of you have been showing. And the triple helix, I don't know if that's a term that you use. In Holland, they love the triple helix. That is always, you should be a good connection between the the private sector, the public sector, and the universities, which is of course true, but also civil society should be a force that is included. So we've been saying we don't need only the triple helix, but we need the quadruple helix. And that we use technology, but that technology is much more of a vehicle than a goal in itself. I'm just going to tell you, Kennisland is not a funded organization by the government. It doesn't even have a mandate. It's really independent, and it's only this group of 20 people. And about 7 years ago, we thought we really need to get our fingers into the education system. Because the education system in the Netherlands, although it might be highly ranked on the PISA score, education in the Netherlands is still the same as it is 40 years ago. When you would take my grandfather to a school, he will know exactly where he is. It hasn't changed, which to my idea is always very strange, that the whole society around us is changing, but education is not. And a lot of people were complaining also about education. And there was a lot of dropouts, and there'd been a lot of research that a lot of the top-down innovations had not worked. So one of the things that we thought, and we're not education experts, but one of the things that we thought is, how is it possible that when you ask people what was really important in your education, a lot of people say the teacher. I just had this great teacher, and that teacher, you know, really made an influence. But if you look at, in Holland, how the schools are organized, teachers have nothing to say. Teachers kind of implement the top-down strategies that are made up by the Ministry of Education. So what we did is we set up this program called Education Pioneers, and we invited teachers to come up with ideas how they would want to improve their school system. So we asked them, do you have a good idea how you think you want to change the way you teach your children, the way you want to organize your school, the way you want to work and learn from your colleagues? And a lot of teachers had a lot of ideas and were very inspired and passionate, because that's what they do every day. They work with students in the classroom. So here you see, and actually this has now turned out to be a national program when we've been running it for 7 years. But here you see one of the teachers who won one of the prizes. So what we did with Education Pioneers is that we invited teachers to come up with ideas. We gave them a bit of money to help them implement their ideas, but also we created a whole community of teacher pioneers who together started this whole movement of teachers saying we want to do things differently and actually starting to do them. I'm just giving you a kind of, so I'm doing one more. Another thing that we've been working on at Kennisland is what we call social labs. And one of the ideas is also that, for example, if you walk in neighborhoods or you talk about elderly, and also in the Netherlands, people are thinking about how do we, what kind of services and help do we need to provide for our elders in our communities? And what you see often is that concepts or ideas are being thought of, but without the elders themselves. And actually, a lot of elders are very, I mean, it's not because you're older you suddenly have nothing to say or you're not an expert about your own life. And so what we have been doing is we've been setting up these labs in communities itself. So we're really in the neighborhood, on the streets. And we work with elderly people themselves to come up and first of all find out what is that, what do they find important? How do you grow old in a nice, good way, and what is needed for that? And it turned out, of course, that a lot of the older people have a lot of good ideas, and actually together they are also very capable of doing that already. And what was interesting is that in these labs we didn't only work with the elders, but we also worked with the professionals and the policymakers from the professional and the government organizations. So it wasn't only that the elderly came up with new ideas, but actually the professionals were learning in a different way. Perhaps in a way which would be much more, less of an expert system, because in Holland the welfare state is very strong, which is always the professional's instinct is, I'll help you. And of course there's a lot of value in that, and in the Netherlands things are very well organized in that sense. But this I help you will also not really empower the people who are, you know, people like to help themselves as well. And actually, but this requires a very different way of working for the local government and the professional organizations. So how can you facilitate, how can you support, how can you enable, instead of being the expert and the helper and the controller? Another thing that we did is we set up a crowdfunding platform and a crowdsourcing platform for neighborhood initiatives, making it much easier for people who have a good idea. I want to set up a new daycare center together with 4 neighbors, that they can do that and crowdfund their money themselves. And it's not only that they can find the money, but they can also ask for expertise. So on this website where you go, you can present your plan and you can say who wants to support me, but you can also say, hey, I would need some legal advice, or can someone come and help cook? Or so we're trying to see how this works, and now actually we're in 10 cities in the Netherlands. This crowdfunding platform is active and it's actually growing quite steadily. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, and you'll see how diverse we are, is that we're also working with a lot of leaders in the cultural sector. Also because I think we believe that the culture can be a very big stimulus for change in a country. And a lot of the leaders of these cultural organizations, they can definitely need support and work in the community together. So although these different interventions are all quite different and we work in different fields, there are perhaps a couple of things that we could take out and which would also perhaps be helpful for you. And so the first one is making a society smarter is quite a big ambition for a small organization with 20 people, but choosing your steps quite deliberately, but also try to find, I sometimes think it's like a massage, like you find the pressure point, like where can you press on that the change will actually be bigger. It will create a ripple effect in the right direction. So perhaps one thing to think about that. The other thing is being an innovator doesn't mean you need to be the innovator, that you have to be the one with always the good ideas, but that you could also be the one that supports the innovators. And I would also urge also here and in Asia in general, create intermediate organizations who actually create I'm thinking of the word, like a fertile ground where things can grow. So instead of being the carpenter where you're building the shed, can you be the gardener? And the gardener just has to ensure that there's enough water and enough sun and that the soil is good, and then things can actually start growing. And how can you create and strengthen community? If you're just by yourself, it's quite difficult. But if you're like here, sitting like this is quite impressive. Having so many people here, you're a whole movement. And that can grow, and you cannot dismiss it. It is just there. And if you use that constructive talent and power that you all have, so much is possible. And then when you're doing things, don't forget to also stop and slow down and experiment and learn and reflect from it. Often I see that in my office too. We start running projects and then we forget. We're like, no, we have to finish our project. But what can we learn from it? And can we share those ideas and create new knowledge actually about what kind of innovation do we need to move on and create new societies? And I think there is a real need for new knowledge, new types of ways of doing things. And we all together, we can work and experiment and prototype, but also we need to learn and be explicit about it and share that. So actually, I think that's all I had to say. So I thank you, and I hope even from a small, very tiny country from the Netherlands, and again, an honor to be here, and I can share something with you, and perhaps afterwards we can even have a couple of questions. So thank you very much.